Good evening, everybody. Welcome to GeoIntel. My name is Cody Jordan. I should have a pretty good show today. It's been a lot of compiling information over the last 3 days. I was going to do a show last night regarding Iran-Israel, and I didn't quite get around to it, so I just wasn't quite up to par with where I wanted to be note-wise. So I went ahead and I took another day, and today's the day. So I guess I haven't covered Iran, Israel. Specifically, I have not covered the Fordo and I think Natanz nuclear facility strikes that the U.S. carried out. I'm going to adjust my camera real quick. There we go, back in focus. I haven't discussed the strikes that the U.S. carried out with B-2 bombers on Fordo and Natanz. So what I'm really going to do, because I haven't discussed that on this channel, is really give more of an overview of everything that's going to be included in the negotiations that lead up to this potential conflict. Specifically, I'm talking about the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the JCPOA, the Snapback Sanctions, etc. And then I'll kind of wrap it up by giving more context to sort of what has been happening in terms of aggression in the region. And we'll just jump right into it. I'm kind of going on longer than I wanted to there, so I'm going to go ahead and just start with sort of the entire situation in the Middle East as it stands right now, because everything's really ramping up, and it's not just between Iran and Israel. It's currently the entire region. Right now, Lebanon is in a conflict where the president is currently standing up to Hezbollah. The president of Lebanon is actually aligning with Netanyahu in terms of trying to disarm Hezbollah. And they're potentially entering a civil war, one which Israel has said that it would back Lebanon, and that is a huge improvement for Israel in that region, because previously Lebanon has really historically had next to no cooperation with the state of Israel whatsoever. In fact, that is why the United States has had to pay off Lebanon to basically keep it back, and it has done the same for other countries, specifically Egypt included. And aside from Lebanon, you also have Syria. I've covered Syria on the channel quite extensively, so if you'd like to learn more about the current Syrian conflict, I would urge you to go view I believe it was my second episode, although I think it's labeled number 1, but you'll find it if you look for it. Currently in Syria, there is what could also be described as civil war or potential civil war between Druze separatists, which have historically aligned with Israel as much as they have with their own country of Syria. The Druze separatists, first of all, there are many of them in Israel. There are, I believe, 1.5 million Druze in Israel, that and those are people who live full-time in Israel. They're not also going back and forth between Syria. That doesn't include Syria's population of Druze. I believe there's only about a quarter or less of that number of Druze within Syria itself. The current conflict there is amongst the Bedouin tribes and the SDF, which are the Syrian government forces backed by al-Julani, who is now known as al-Shura, who is the interim president of Syria and is currently residing in Damascus. And Damascus and Israel have been in negotiations recently to try and settle that conflict as well. And what's really it's not extremely surprising due to Giuliani's past, but seeing a potential resolution happening between not only al-Julani but the Druze in Syria could really change the landscape of Syria and of the militia factors that exist within Syria. Also in Yemen, there's currently a conflict that has broken out. The Houthis have been firing constantly towards Israel, pretty well unopposed in Yemen, and Israel has been striking them pretty rigorously. And then that's just to give really an overview of the Middle East as it currently stands, and just to give you an idea of how volatile the entire region is at the moment. Israel and Iran, just to give a little bit of backstory before we dive into this new potential conflict happening within a matter of days at this point, sort of delve into the Natanz and Fordo strikes a little bit. So just to sort of recap, the entire conflict there had to do with Iran not complying, or supposedly not complying, with the IAEA, which is the International Atomic Energy Association, I believe, or agency rather. And Iran would go on to blame the IAEA for spying on its nuclear facilities, although they've walked that back. Quite a few government officials have walked that back in Iran. But they blamed the IAEA for leaking classified intel about Fordo to the Americans, and they believed that because of how effective the U.S. was in its strikes, that some form of insider intel had to be leaked, and the fingers were immediately pointed to the IAEA. And that's a problem because the IAEA is part of this larger purview that exists in terms of the Iran nuclear, the Iran NPT, and the JCPOA. I know, sorry, that was a bit of a word salad there. It got crossed up in my mind a bit, but what I'm trying to say is because the IAEA is no longer allowed in Iran to do nuclear inspections, until then, we don't really have a confident idea of what their current stockpiles look like, what their current enrichment looks like. Although there are ways of telling that, and I don't know the specifics on it, but from what I understand, certain satellites can detect the creation of fissile material. So there are ways for the American government, without the IAEA, to monitor their progression in terms of the enrichment of fissile material. But with that being said, there have been many people within the American government and elsewhere that have said that the strikes that we carried out on Fordo and Natanz were not nearly as effective as we had claimed that they were. Iran claimed that the vast majority of the stockpile of enriched uranium had been moved, and there are very likely other facilities that Iran has that we are unaware of, although that's really more speculation than anything. Now for Israel. Israel is expanding for the same reason that it has gone into conflict with basically every other region, which is that it is trying to fulfill the clean break memo and instill greater Israel across the rest of the Middle East and become a superpower in the Middle East, and really just sort of dictate not only that region, but potentially even the whole of the Mediterranean itself. And with this happening, and with Iran refusing to back down, they're currently talking about going to war again. And I'll go ahead and give you a few different quotes from people in regards to exactly that. These quotes have been compiled over the last 9 days. And we'll start with the Israeli Chief of Staff, Eyal Zamir, says that the war with Iran is, quote, not over yet. Israel Katz, who is the defense minister of Israel, has said, quote, there is a possibility of renewing the campaign against Iran. We need to maintain the achievements and air superiority. And in terms of the air superiority there, just as a side note, by the end of the previous Israel-Iran conflict, Israel had destroyed systematically so many different air defense installments, not only in Iran, but elsewhere, such as Syria, which was a huge factor in being able to fly planes to Iran, was obliterating these air defense installments in Syria so that the Israeli Air Force could fly over the top of Syria and get to Iran without having to worry about those deterrences closer to their borders. And so because they destroyed so many of those anti-air defense systems, they had complete and utter air superiority at the end of that war. And that's not to say that it was outright obliteration. Israel was extremely aggressive in that war. They did far better than I think even they thought they would. And Iran was not nearly as defensive as pretty much everybody expected it to be. And that's not to say that it wasn't still hostile, but many have speculated that Iran did not do nearly as much damage as it could have if it wanted to. There is speculation there, but overall, at the end of that last conflict, Israel was starting to run really low on I believe, their Patriot missiles for the Iron Dome. I think they're called Patriot defense missiles for the Iron Dome. They ran out of a supply of those missiles in order to shoot down incoming rockets from Iran, not just rockets, but drones as well. They shot down a lot of drones with helicopters and other means, but overall, the Iron Dome was very effective. But towards the end of the war, it started having a smaller and smaller success rate for a few reasons. The first being that because they were running out of missiles, there were more gaps in that Iron Dome for Iran to strike into. And secondly, Iran started using hypersonic weapons. And they really only did that in the final 3 to 4 days of that conflict. And we don't know what their current hypersonic missile stockpile looks like. We do know that Israel has since started to regain enough missiles to supply that Iron Dome system. We don't know if they're back to the same capacity that they were before the first conflict. But America has been working tirelessly, Trump specifically, to make sure that those defense systems are back up and running in Israel. So, furthermore, on ILTV, which is an Israeli news station, an Israeli news outlet, they said, quote, not only Iran is preparing, a very large shipment of ammunition arrived in Israel earlier today. And this was, I think, the 14th of August, so just 9 days ago, they said that a very large shipment of ammunition had arrived in Israel. Ismail Kausari, a member of Iran's National Security Commission, warned the United Kingdom, France, and Germany that if snapback sanctions are triggered, Iran will pull out of the NPT, which is a non-proliferation treaty. This is really the main focus of this second part of the conflict, is the disagreements between Iran and the Western powers over the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and the JCPOA. So I'll just go ahead and read that quote again so that we can sort of deconstruct it. So, Ismail Kausari, a member of Iran's National Security Commission, warned the United Kingdom, France, and Germany that if snapback sanctions are triggered, Iran will pull out of the NPT. So, because I haven't in depth talked about this on this channel, I really wanted to deconstruct it and sort of just give an overview for anybody who isn't fully aware what the NPT is, what the implications of that are, and we'll delve into the rest of it as well. So the treaty on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons, quote shorthand, the NPT, was signed by Iran in 1968 and ratified in 1970. It obligates non-nuclear weapon states like Iran to forego developing nuclear weapons while allowing them to pursue peaceful nuclear energy under strict International Atomic Energy Agency oversight, which is the IAEA that we had discussed a minute ago. In 2002, an Iranian opposition group revealed undeclared nuclear facilities at Natanz in Iraq, raising alarms about Iran's compliance with the NPT. The IAEA and the P5+1, the 5 permanent UN Security Council members, China, France, Russia, the UK, the US, plus Germany, began negotiations to address these concerns. Iran's refusal to halt uranium enrichment led to multiple UN Security Council resolutions. The IAEA reported in 2023 the discovery of uranium enriched to 83.7%, close to weapons grade levels, of which I believe 90% is weapons grade, though Iran provided an explanation that the IAEA accepted. The IAEA in 2023, when this happened, detected uranium particles enriched to 83.7% purity at the Fordow fuel enrichment plant. Iran provided an explanation to this high enrichment level resulted from unintended fluctuations during the transition period when the facility was being reconfigured to produce 60% enriched uranium. Specifically, Iran stated that these fluctuations occurred either during the commissioning of a new cascade configuration in November 2022 or while replacing a feed cylinder. So that's the NPT for you, and that's only the second part of what I said was the reason for this current conflict. I said that it was the NPT, the JCPOA, which we will discuss in a minute, but also, as Ismail Kausari, the member of Iran's National Security Commission, had mentioned, if snapback sanctions are triggered, that is when Iran will pull out of the NPT. So what are snapback sanctions? So snapback sanctions are part of the JCPOA, which is the, I believe, the Joint Committee Pact. Oh, okay, sorry. Let me not go... Let me not go through with the rest of that because I don't know off the top of my head and I'm going to make a fool of myself. Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. There we go. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA. So, the JCPOA is a deal that Barack Obama had reached with not only Iran, but I believe, the entirety of the EU, and I'll get into that in a minute, and if I'm wrong, I will correct myself. But Barack Obama had got into it, or had effectively finalized it in 2015, to which we stopped imposing sanctions on Iran as long as they were compliant with the IAEA. The rest of the European Union that had signed on to that agreement went ahead and followed through with the relieving of sanctions, I believe, the year after it was implemented. And then Trump would go on to remove them in sort of a larger plan to, I suppose, push forward his Abraham Accord agenda, although I think that it's far more likely that Israel had pushed Trump to do so without him fully understanding the conflict, or with him understanding the conflict and not being too concerned over the possible implications of doing so regardless. So we'll just jump into what the JCPOA is. So it was finalized on July 14th of 2015 in Vienna, and it was a landmark agreement between Iran and the P5+1 coordinated by the European Union. It aimed to ensure Iran's nuclear program remained peaceful in exchange for sanctions relief. The agreement was endorsed by UN Security Council Resolution 2231, which also established the snapback mechanism for reinstating sanctions in case of Iran's noncompliance. So I'll just reiterate it again. That snapback mechanism is what we are really discussing here, because the snapback mechanism is what Iran does not want to be triggered, because they will start being hit with sanctions from the European Union countries. So, and I didn't discuss this, but I'll do it now because I'm realizing there's a bit of a hole in my speech here. When Trump decided to pull out of the JCPOA, the rest of the JCPOA amongst the P5+1 nations remained intact. So the would that be, hold on, let me make sure it's 6 countries. Okay, it's 6 in total. I know that's, I didn't know if the U.S. was included in the 5+1, so I just had to make sure. But yes, I can add 5+1. When when Donald Trump pulled out of the JCPOA, the rest of the JCPOA remained intact between the P5 minus the 1. The +1 was originally Germany, but we'll consider it America in this case. So now it's just the P5. So the rest of the people that had agreed to not sanction Iran in order to basically deter them from enriching nuclear weapons are still in this agreement, and there has been a bit of tension there, although they haven't, the rest of the countries have not gone the entire way by sanctioning, by pulling out of the JCPOA and fully sanctioning Iran, although some of the other 2 or 3 countries, I believe, have imposed sanctions on Iran for other reasons. A senior Iranian official told The Telegraph that Tehran sees it as a vital threat if the E3 countries reimpose snapback sanctions. The Iranian source said it does not have the economic or military power to handle the situation and fears a new popular uprising, quote, and this time it will be different. So there's a few reasons why Iran does not want these snapback sanctions to happen, and I've already discussed one of them. So one of them is the sanctions relief. So in return, the UN, EU, and US lifted nuclear sanctions, freeing up over $100 billion in frozen Iranian assets. This is when the JCPOA was created. So when the JCPOA went into effect July 14th of 2015, I don't know if you remember this, but I specifically remember at that time, Obama was president, and all of the Republicans were rah-rahing over this $100 billion that had been sent to Iran. And Obama, if I'm not mistaken, I vividly remember this, so perhaps someone had illustrated it by posting some type of photoshopped image, but I strictly remember an image of $100 billion in cash being transported on top a aircraft carrier, or perhaps it was $1 billion, but either way, it was a significant sum of money. And this was directly after the JCPOA went into effect, and this was money coming from the U.S., money that was Iran's money that we had froze, and we freed it up, $100 billion worth. In terms of other forms of reasons as to why Iran does not want the snapback sanctions, one of them is nuclear restrictions. So Iran agreed to reduce its uranium enrichment capacity by 2/3, limit enrichment to 3.67%, well below weapons grade levels, dilute or sell 96% of its low and medium enriched uranium stockpile, and allow extensive IAEA inspections. These restrictions were to last 10 to 15 years, depending on the provisions. Now, at the end of that, because it was originally stated as 10 to 15 years, because it was decided when the bill was written that the 10-year mark would be the shortest amount of time, and then the 15-year mark at the latest. But 10 years at the earliest being the mark in which they could potentially renege on the JCPOA and everything else in it. The snapback mechanism, the UN Security Council Resolution 2231 included a provision allowing any JCPOA participant to trigger the automatic reimposition of pre-2015 UN sanctions if Iran was found in significant non-performance of its commitments. This mechanism set to expire on October 18th, 2025, termination day, and that is if I'm not mistaken, that is the end of that 10-year period that I had just discussed. Cannot be vetoed by other Security Council members, making it a powerful tool. So in other words, any of the 5 countries that are still involved in the JCPOA with Iran, any single one of those countries can I want to word this carefully, because we're going to talk about China and Russia in a second, and their potential move to veto China and Russia want to veto the ending. Holy crap. You know, guys, sometimes I hop on these things and I do it at like midnight, and it's not necessarily the case today, but it's like 11 o'clock, and I've been up since like 4 o'clock, and it's just, everything's kind of mingling together in my mind right now. So let's see if third time's a charm and we can get this right. So any one of the P5, the 5 countries that are still a part of the JCPOA, can veto again, I'm doing it again, 4th time's a charm, I swear to God. Look at me. Let me make sure my camera's focused, actually. It's not focused. Just a second. Come on now. Okay. Now that we're focused, look at me. 4th time's a charm. We're going to get it right. Holy shit. You know what the problem is? I'm reading this. I have my own thoughts in my mind going on, and I'm reading my notes, and part of my notes somewhat contradict another part of my notes in terms of how they're worded, and it's just, it's messing me up bad. But we'll get through it. So Take a sip of water here. Today, Junior. If any one of the 5 countries that are still a part of the JCPOA decide to trigger the snapback mechanism, it cannot be vetoed by any of the other countries. So any one of those countries there, any one of the 5 countries that I had mentioned earlier, in fact, we'll go ahead and read them one more time. China, France, Russia, the UK, and Germany. Any one of those 5 countries can trigger the snapback mechanism, and they can effectively do it with next to no evidence. They can claim that Iran, or they believe Iran, is not following the IAEA guidelines, although they're operating in very gray territory in terms of the guidelines they're following after they stopped cooperating with the IAEA. But any one of those 5 countries can say that Iran is not properly cooperating with their nuclear agreements, and they can trigger the snapback sanctions. And when they do that, not a single other one of the 4 countries can veto that decision. So it makes it really powerful in that case, because it only takes one. It only takes one. And if Germany decides to really play hardball, as they kind of have been doing so recently, and they decide to be very pro-Israel and anti-Iran, they could very well trigger that mechanism and cause this entire thing to escalate just by their own doing. Any one of those 5 countries can, for that matter. The JCPOA has been in crisis since Trump withdrew in 2018, which I'd mentioned that earlier, but I didn't have the date in there. And then since May 2019, Iran has progressively violated the JCPOA restrictions. They exceeded the 3.67 enrichment cap, reaching 60% enrichment. They expanded its uranium stockpile to 30 times the permitted limit. They resumed activities at previously prohibited facilities, such as Fordow. And they restricted IAEA access since February 2021, undermining monitoring efforts. U.S. sanctions have really done a number on Iran. First of all, Iran is not only dealing with an economic crisis, it's also dealing with a drought. And that's something that I don't know why I didn't include it in this draft here. I think it was just some of the news articles that I had bookmarked were just a little bit out of reach as far as how far back I went on sort of researching this piece here. But recently Iran has been in a huge drought. One of their main water reservoirs, I don't remember which one it was exactly, was at roughly 20% of what it is supposed to be at. So overall, there's just this huge issue in terms of people dying of thirst and going thirsty. And the Iranian government has sort of, as you could probably expect, hoarded some of it to themselves. So there's a bit of controversy there amongst the civilians and the leaders of the country. And also at the same time, the Iranian government, funny enough, although I don't really know that it is funny, I think it's probably true, and it probably is the case. The Iranian government has been claiming recently, and at least recently as far as I know, and perhaps even back for a couple months or years at this point, has been claiming that they believe the reason for the drought is Israeli and American weather modification, which, I haven't necessarily gone as far into the HARP conspiracies as I would like to for maybe a future episode or something. And for anybody that doesn't know, HARP is the High Altitude Aerospace Research Project. I think it was a DARPA project. And there's a lot of evidence there that the American government is able to manipulate weather using high electronic frequency input. Also, we know that the American government and other governments like the UAE use weather modification technology such as cloud seeding. In fact, Saudi Arabia, I believe, had a really bad flood that occurred a year or two ago because of cloud seeding. And I think it's even possible that the recent floods in Texas were caused by the same thing, although that's purely speculation, though, so take that with a grain of salt. Let me get my camera back in focus one more time. Need more subscribers so I can get a Patreon, so that my subscribers can go to my Patreon and give me a new goddamn camera, because this thing fucking sucks. I hate it. Okay, so, but on top of the drought, they also are having a huge economic crisis at the moment. U.S. sanctions have devastated Iran's economy, pushing 1/3 of its population into poverty and fueling protests. Iran has sought to circumvent sanctions by increasing oil exports to China and deepening ties with Russia. Iranian media said the country's main stock index has dropped 22% over the past 3 months. And then on August 20th, Iranian protesters in, I can't pronounce the name of the town, but it's just south of Tehran, are demanding electricity from the Islamic regime. And then, furthermore, on top of just the repercussions economically that the snapbacks are having on Iran, there's also further E3 threats here that they have to worry about. So August 14th, 2025, France and Germany and the UK issued a 2-week ultimatum to Iran to resolve IAEA inspection issues, threatening snapback sanctions if unmet. And this is really what kicked off the entire thing, and I wish I would have put that at the top of my my notes here, because it would have framed it a little better when I started the podcast. But August 14th, 2025, France, Germany, and the UK issued a 2-week ultimatum to Iran to resolve IAEA inspection issues, threatening snapback sanctions if unmet. Foreign ministers of France, Britain, and Germany stated the mechanism to reimpose sanctions on Iran can be activated if a satisfactory solution is not reached by the end of August. So, in other words, we have 5 days left until the rest of this really ramps up. Iran obviously doesn't want to go down swinging, and they're showing that in a number of ways, one of which is ramping up rhetoric, one of which is resupplying arms. They've also been negotiating with other countries to resupply defenses. Another is they're sort of launching counter arguments as to why they believe it's invalid. So Iranian officials claim the snapback mechanism lacks legitimacy since the U.S. violated the JCPOA first, and European countries failed to deliver promised sanctions relief. And they have a pretty good argument there, quite frankly. The JCPOA, while it may not have been perfect, was far better than what we've had to deal with since then, especially if this conflict were to kick off again. Let's say that Iran truly does have the weapons stockpile that they are gloating that they have. If that is the case, and Israel has not fully restocked their Iron Dome missiles, Iran could unleash absolute hell upon Israel, and quite frankly, their back has been against the wall for so long now that if they were holding back at all the first time around, they really have no reason to at this point. They've already been bombed by the U.S. unless the regime were just to completely fold and throw up their arms and say that they were done with done with ruling, and they just gave up their power, which, as you can imagine, is almost certainly not going to happen. Unless that happens, I just lost my train of thought again. Guys, it's episode 3. I probably don't have any live viewers, but that's okay. That's just how this is going to go for the first, I don't know, couple weeks. Like I said, episode 3. I plan on doing this pretty much 4 days a week from now on. So I'll be hopefully releasing something Monday, Friday, and Sunday. And I will hopefully continue with that on a pretty regular schedule. But I'm still kind of getting into this entire thing that I'm doing here, trying to keep my ideas flowing along with what I'm reading, trying to make sure that I'm simultaneously not forgetting anything. And when I do it late at night and I don't have a ton of caffeine in my system, it doesn't always end up great. So we're going to have times like that where I lose my train of thought a bit, and we're just going to have to sort of pick up where we left off. So we'll just restate that last part there. So Iranian officials claim the snapback mechanism lacks legitimacy since the U.S. violated the JCPOA first, and European countries failed to deliver promised sanctions relief. And it's a very good argument on their part. And it could be the case that the EU, with a little outside nudging of people of countries within the P5, and I'm strictly talking about Russia and China, but the EU potentially with the help of Russia and China, although getting them to cooperate or poise themselves as operating with Russia at the time may not be likely, but it could be the case that those countries are able to reach an agreement here. Something, guys, I apologize. I tell you what I'm going to do. In order to not, I don't even know if you can see me in the camera view anymore. In order to not keep messing myself up, I think I need to step up, stand up for a second, maybe go pee and slap myself a few times just to wake back up. So I'm going to pick back up where I left off and hopefully not be absolutely retarded next time. So just a second here. Give me like 60 seconds. Okay, guys. I think I'm better. I think. I don't know, but I think. I got hope. That's all I need. Okay. If my camera will go into focus, for the love of God. There we go. I keep getting stuck on the same part, the same sentence I keep reading, and I keep getting stuck on it. It seems to be the case twice now. I believe that's what happened before. It was one sentence, and I kept reading it while I'm talking and getting tripped up. So we're just going to push on past it. Keep on pushing. So, David Lammy, Britain's foreign secretary, has said, quote, Iran's nuclear program remains a threat to international security. As the E3, the UK, France, and Germany, we have offered to extend sanctions relief if Iran meets our conditions. If not, we will reimpose these measures. Iran still has the choice to resume diplomacy. The ball is in their court. Also, recently, Iran scheduled a meeting with top Russian and Chinese officials in Tehran to work on protecting the country from possible UN sanctions via the 2015 nuclear deal snapback mechanism. However, Russia and China could pledge to use their UN Security Council vetoes to block any resolution that would prevent snapback sanctions. A veto can be used to block a resolution to continue sanctions relief, which would result in snapback sanctions being reimposed. Maybe I'm not fully there yet, guys. A veto can be used to block a resolution to continue sanctions relief, which would result in snapback elections being reimposed. You know something? I'm probably sitting here looking like I'm reading a script that I haven't read, but what it is me typing this and looking back at it, having not looked it over sufficiently, and just being like, what in the heck? Why did I type it like that? But effectively, what I was trying to convey in that sentence is this: Russia and China, because they make up 3/5 of the UNSC, which is the United Nations Security Council, they could pledge to veto to block any resolution that would prevent snapback sanctions. And the reason that they may do this is basically to force the E3 that does not want to cooperate currently into cooperating or pursuing further diplomacy with Iran without activating the snapback sanctions. So, in other words, they may effectively bluff and act as if though they're going to veto any potential reimposing of the JCPOA or continuing the JCPOA without reimposing the snapback sanctions, to where Iran does not have to deal with the sanctions from those countries. Russia and China could act as if though they're going to veto this and basically bluff escalating the situation in order to force the E3 that's acting tough to the table to negotiate further It's basically, that was just something that I had read. It was somebody threw that up as something that could potentially happen. At the end of the day, Russia and China do not want to see those sanctions go into place because downstream it would affect them. However, one of the reasons that could be a strategy is if they come to the understanding together, China and Russia, that the end result of those sanctions do not hurt them enough to really be bothered by imposing them. I feel fucking terrible for whoever has to watch this. I'll tell you that right now. What the fuck am I even... This is awful. My first episode, or last episode rather, was so fluid. I'm just like, I feel like my eyes have just been drooping this whole time. I'm just out of it. Next time I do this, it's going to be at like 8 in the morning, and I'm going to have 9 different Red Bulls in my system. Holy shit. If I was watching this right now, I'd be like, this guy is fucking retarded. Anyway. We didn't come back all good. When I thought I did, we didn't. Came back here just as stupid as I was when I left. To recap, if I can even do so without completely butchering it again. And I know I've said it 10 times, but I just want to say it one more so then I feel like I can move on. Russia and China do not want the sanctions to be imposed. It would be very bad on them. However, they could determine that they're not bad enough to not go through with, because them seeing the sanctions through would force Iran closer to Russia and China, bring them closer together, overall draw them further into BRICS, and so it's very possible that they actually could veto any resolution in order to maintain a strong alliance with Iran, and potentially even offering up to the E3 an agreement where Russia and China individually, it would, although the U.S. would more than likely insist it be China as opposed to Russia, China and Russia could form their own inspection teams and have those teams report to the rest of the E3 as opposed to the IAEA. However, whether or not America would go along with that's another thing, and Iran may not want to do that if America's not in on it, because the majority of the sanctions that they're facing are sanctions being imposed by America. So we got that out of the way now. Let's keep on rolling. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi told Fox News that Tehran will not abandon its nuclear enrichment program, despite significant damage to its nuclear facilities from U.S. airstrikes during the recent Israel-Iran conflict. August 17th, Iranians report that the Shiran oil depot, a major fuel storage facility located in the northwest of Tehran, has just exploded. And we have a video of that, so I'm going to go ahead and show it to you in just a second. Get out of my media window here. I feel so bad for whoever's watching this. A large fire then broke out at an oil warehouse in southern Tehran, which we have that as well. I guess I can leave my media window up. And then the Reform Front, which is Iran's largest coalition body of the I don't know what this is. Majlis coalition body. Not sure what that is. Consisting of 30-plus reformist parties, has called on the Iranian president, Pezeshkian, to temporarily suspend all nuclear enrichment in exchange for lifting sanctions. Reform Front also urges the restoration of ties with the IAEA and to provide the UN body permission to supervise Iran's nuclear program. Their statement emphasizes that the country faces serious threats, including the risk of UN sanctions returning through the snapback mechanism. The Reform Front claims that the country may face a new wave of crisis, a worsening economic recession, exacerbated by the recent armed conflict with Israel. On August 20th, Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi said Iran has not yet reached a stage where effective nuclear talks can take place with the U.S. Heavy GPS jamming was then recorded in Tehran and in neighboring areas in Iran on August 20th as well. And then an unknown explosion was reported in Mashhad, Iran last night. And I just say this because I've been recording all of these weird instances of explosions and GPS jammings. These are not a one-off. These have been happening very often in the last month or so since the end of the first Iran-Israel conflict. And it's been a lot of, coincidentally, oil refineries and things of that nature. So you can only assume it is some form of attack from an outside force, whether it be Israel or the United States, or potentially another country, but more than likely Israel or the United States. On August 21st, the U.S. Treasury sanctioned 13 companies and 8 vessels over suspected links to Iran, in a move aimed at curbing Tehran's oil exports in defiance of U.S. sanctions. Iran then closed its airspace in Khuzestan, southwest Iran, and surrounding area for military exercises, which would likely explain the cancellation of flights between Iraq and Iran. Bloomberg then said Iran's suspension of nuclear inspections has triggered crisis talks between the IAEA and the U.S. The IAEA officials will travel to Washington this week. The trip has been planned after IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi's top inspector failed in a recent attempt to win Iranian approval to resume monitoring of Iran's nuclear program. The IAEA say urgent action is needed. Reimposing sanctions through the snapback mechanism is critical to countering the threat and safeguarding international security. However, Khamenei backs renewing U.S. nuclear talks after seeing them as a key to avoiding military confrontation and ensuring the regime's survival. August 23rd, according to Ukrainian intelligence, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian used his recent trip to Minsk to ask President Alexander Lukashenko to help in rebuilding Iran's air defense network. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said the illusion of Greater Israel is an existential danger and a threat to international peace and security. Iranian government spokesman said, war and negotiation are both strategic tools that must be used in the right place. And according to the Telegraph, Iran is willing to reduce uranium enrichment to avoid British sanctions and reduce U.S. and Israeli military pressure. Although you'll notice that that quote from the Telegraph there merely said they are willing to reduce uranium enrichment as opposed to outright quit, which is what Israel would very much like to see. So, for the time being, it seems as if, though, the second part of the conflict is inevitable. Khamenei was then quoted as saying, "Those who say that Iran should engage in direct negotiations with America and, quote, solve the issue have a superficial and retarded way of thinking." And then Khamenei said, this is just in regards to Israel and the potential conflict to come, Khamenei said, quote, "We are in full readiness for any action that is possible and can be carried out for the sake of Iran. May Allah uproot from the region this deep and deadly cancer. The Zionist regime is the enemy standing before us today, and it is the most hated regime in the world today. All avenues of assistance to this regime must be completely blocked." And then, to end it all off, the Trump Department of Defense plans to spend more than $3.5 billion to replenish weapon stockpiles depleted by Israel, per Bloomberg. And that's the final news story that I was able to capture before compiling all of this. And that really ties in to what I was saying earlier about the Iron Dome and the need to replenish those weapons that they depleted. Of course, it's not just that. There's tons of ammunition that Israel depleted. There's tons of offensive missiles and drone systems that they depleted that need to be restocked. But the biggest thing on the list, because Israel air superiority dictates that this is effectively Iran's only way of retaliation. Iran is going to be, if they strike again, they're going to be using drones, missiles, hypersonic missiles. They're going to be using vast swarms of them. And if Israel's Iron Dome is not fully stockpiled before that point in time, and the holes that we saw at the end of the last conflict are still there, Israel could suffer heavily. And again, as we discussed in the beginning of this, that's just the start of the current Middle Eastern conflict that's happening right now. And I will get into the rest of that on Wednesday. I don't know how long this has been going on for. It feels like an hour or more. But Wednesday, I'll do the show a lot earlier, hopefully have a lot more energy. Hopefully not, just be completely out of it like I was on this episode. If you made it through this whatsoever, I appreciate it. And man, I'm sorry. I'll try to do better next time. But like I said, I'll go ahead. Wednesday, we'll touch on Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen. And then Friday, we'll probably do Gaza. And then I'm not sure what I'm going to do Sunday quite yet. I'll have to figure that out a little bit later. But, yeah, we'll do better next time, I guess. Thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate it. Please like and subscribe if you like this whatsoever. If you could stand to put up with that hour of nonsense that I just gave you. So, please stick around for more. I'll do better on the next one, I promise. So, I'll see you then. Thanks, guys.